anyone else. Oh, thank you, Missy. And let anyone else in once they come in from the waiting room. But since it's going to be a small group today, like I mentioned before, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to jump in. This can be a conversation. We are recording it, and we, depending upon how much we're chatting, or I'll share that out with people who weren't able to attend. I think some people are at spring break. But I'm Rebecca Zimmerman. I am the Community Engagement Director at Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, and we coordinate the Arkansas Kids Count Coalition, which is a membership group of individuals and organizations across the state of Arkansas who are dedicated to raising awareness about policy issues impacting children and teaching people how to lobby and advocate. And if you're not already a member of the Kids Count Coalition, we hope you'll consider joining. I'll be sending out an email with follow-up resources after this conversation, and I'll send a link as well to join the Kids Count Coalition. So this evening, I'll be talking about 4 basic ways that you can do election advocacy this year. That is issue-based. When you think about election advocacy, you probably think about things like running for office, volunteering on a campaign, or donating to a political party. But election years are a really great time to raise awareness about policies and trying to move your policy goals forward, while a lot of people are paying more attention to issues and where candidates stand. And the things that I'll be talking about today are basic things that you can do to show that the entry point to issue-based election advocacy is pretty low. But I hope that these things that I'll talk about will inspire creative, bold ideas that you have on your own outside of just these basic ways you can communicate with candidates in your network during the election year. So I'll talk about direct advocacy with the candidates, candidate forums, advocating with your network, and running ballot measures. But I'm going to start off in just a moment talking about your goals, because anytime I'm giving a training on advocacy, we need to start with our goal first, and everything that we decide to do after that needs to be in service of achieving our goal. But I want to launch a poll right now to let y'all take and see how many of you have contacted candidates, not already elected officials, though they may be already elected officials. You may be contacting them in their capacity as elected officials, but how many of you have contacted candidates about issues that you care about? If you can take that poll really quick. Well, it looks like we have a split. Half of you have, half of you haven't. So I'm excited to be talking with y'all today about direct advocacy with the candidates. So, but first, to think through what your advocacy goal is. So first, I'm talking about your overarching advocacy goal. Like, what law do you want to get passed to improve the lives of kids in our state, be it at the federal level, the state level, your local school board, or your city council? Maybe you want to get a law passed that would eliminate juvenile court fines and fees to make sure that families who are low income and their children aren't put at a disadvantage within the juvenile justice system because they're low income. Maybe you want to get a law passed to extend the amount of time a pregnant mother is covered after she gives birth under the Medicaid program, to make sure that we have good health outcomes for mothers after birth in that critical first year of their child's life. Maybe you don't have a big specific policy goal you want to achieve. Maybe you are part of groups like Citizens First Congress or want to support the work of Arkansas advocates, and you're just trying to find new ways that you can do that when you see issues come up that groups like ours are talking about. So you might have this big overarching goal. What's that law that you eventually want to get passed? But then for purposes of our conversation today, we want to think through what is your election year goal. So what can you do this year that will get you closer to your ultimate goal? So maybe you want to talk with as many candidates as possible so you can get potential bill sponsors lined up before the election even happens, because people vote in November, the General Assembly starts in January. That's not very much time that you have to recruit bill sponsors. Maybe that the Arkansas General Assembly isn't meeting for months now. They're not going to meet again until January for their general session, and maybe you want to keep your network engaged on whatever issue, get them passionate and caring about this and advocating in what ways they can during the election, because you don't want either the momentum you've already built to fizzle out, or you want to build momentum as you get into the General Assembly session. So, or maybe, like I mentioned before, you're just wanting to support the goals of organizations like Arkansas Advocates, in which case, your election advocacy goal will just be to support the work of groups like ours or whatever group in achieving their policy goals in new ways during the election year. So we have a few writing assignments throughout this presentation. And the first one, oh, this is not the first one. And the first one is writing down, what is your advocacy goal? So I'd like us to just take a minute to write down what your ultimate advocacy goal is. What's that policy that you want to see get implemented at whatever level of government? And then what you hope to achieve during this election year that is in service of your ultimate advocacy goal. And there may be several things that you want to achieve this year. And if you have any questions so far or want to share your goals in the chat, you can do that and I'll read them out. But I'll give you just a minute to write that down. What's your advocacy goals overall and then for the election year? Anyone want to share? It's okay if you don't. Lori, you unmuted? Oh, no. Annoying.
Trying to get settled here. Just in my role with the call, obviously I have a heart for children and families, and through that work, I really try to concentrate on helping our legislators, the governor's office, understand the value of foster families and the needs of children who are in foster care, and also advocate for the agency, Division of Children and Family Services, through that to help them do the best job that they can do, and for families to be doing the best jobs that they can do on behalf of children who have been taken into foster care. And so for me, I think my advocacy is very related to not necessarily to lawmaking, but more to education and perhaps what little influence we have to impact the lives of children and families just through education and advocacy for that particular group.
Yeah, so you have the option, not necessarily to lobby for a specific piece of legislation, but to make sure that candidates are informed about these different issues that they might end up voting for, because candidates are just like us. They are just like us. You could, any one of you in this workshop today could be a candidate for office, and we're not experts in everything, and candidates aren't experts in everything. And so they look to their potential constituents to help inform them about the issues they should be paying attention to. And Evelyn said, be more informed, specifically around bills dealing with education. So those are both good ones. So the first tactic I want to talk about in terms of election advocacy is probably something a lot of you have done before for your interactions with elected officials once they're, already been voted into office. I'm talking about things like writing an email or sending snail mail letter, giving them a phone call, trying to set up a meeting with them. If you're a nonprofit, you can invite them to your site and show them around your nonprofit, talk about the work that you do, and explain how that connects to your ultimate policy goal. So these are just really back to the basics things that you can do with candidates that you probably already do with elected officials, but you're laying the groundwork already in case they get elected to make sure that they're already informed about these issues. Because like I said a little bit ago, it's a quick turnaround between them being elected and them starting in office. And so if the sooner that they can learn that information so that everything's not being dumped on them in 2 months, the better, and the more likely they are to remember you and connect with you once they are elected. And when you connect with candidates, elected officials, or really anyone about issues, it's important to make both head and heart arguments, whether you're writing or having a conversation with them. So you want to share any data and statistics that you have that talk about the scope of the problem so they can really see how many potential constituents in their district are impacted by this issue. But you also want to make those heart arguments, because we all are really smart people, and we do make logical decisions, but we definitely make emotional decisions. And the things that I think we fight hardest for are the ones that we do have that emotional connection to. And especially during election years, if you're listening to candidates speak at an event or their ads or reading their interviews or their social media posts, you'll see a lot of the arguments they make are emotionally based. And so you want to connect them where they're at during the election year, and make sure that any stories you have, either how this issue's personally impacted you or people you care about, maybe a family member or a client that your nonprofit has, that can make a big difference in terms of how much they care about the issue and the likelihood of them being a champion for the issue later down the line if they are elected. And throughout this workshop, I do want to make a point that I'll be talking about some things that you can do both as a nonprofit or as an individual, but there are rules around if you work for a 501c3 nonprofit and you're wanting to advocate as an employee of a 501c3 nonprofit of what you can and cannot do. Nonprofits can lobby and advocate, but rules do apply. And there's a lot more rules during election year. There's a really great website called Boulder Advocacy that's run by a national nonprofit called Alliance for Justice that has a lot of really great resources with the do's and don'ts of nonprofit advocacy, with resources particularly around election advocacy as well. They have blogs, they have fact sheets. And if your questions are answered in those materials, they also have a free helpline that you can call to get your questions answered. I'll share a link to that after the fact, but that's a really great resource to check out if you are wanting to do this work as a nonprofit. I'll also say that if you are reaching out to candidates directly to inform them about issues that you care about as a nonprofit, you do have to reach out to all the candidates in office. Let's say your nonprofit is in Senate District 32. If you reach out to one candidate in Senate District 32 to share information, you have to reach out to all the candidates in District 32 to share information. You can't pick and choose which candidates you reach out to. You have to reach out to them all, because as some of the rules around nonprofit election advocacy, well, the key rules are you can't show any preference to any candidate, any party, anything like that. You have to be totally impartial with that, with your issue advocacy. So just keep that in mind if you are reaching out to candidates as a nonprofit. You do have to reach all the candidates for office if you're reaching out to one. And again, check back with the Boulder Advocacy website. That's designed by attorneys. I'm not an attorney, and they have the best knowledge about this. And you'll find when you do read the materials, if you're with a nonprofit from Boulder Advocacy, the line with election advocacy is sometimes more vague than other things. So you just want to keep that in mind. One additional thing that you might do as a nonprofit that you probably wouldn't do as an individual advocating is you could share a candidate memo. That's something that Arkansas Advocates has done before, and we're doing it this year. We're sending a memo to all the candidates running for State House and State Senate that just gives, it's just a 4-page document total. We're giving brief overviews of different policies that we think are important impacting kids. And at the end, we give them an invitation to talk more with us about these different policies if they want to learn more and have a conversation with us. And so that's something that you can do as a nonprofit organization.
Rebecca, this is Missy. I have a question about that. Is this okay if I ask it now?
Sure, go ahead.
And I feel like I should know the answer. You made a really important comment about sharing information with both sides. But if a candidate contacts you for information and you weren't planning on sharing it with everybody, but they contact you, you send them what they want, are you then obligated to send it to their opponents?
Yeah, so I saw something from Boulder Advocacy, and anything that has to do with this, I would definitely say reference their website because I'm not an attorney, but it did look like best practice is to share with other ones too. Yeah, I think that's the best practice there is even if they reached out to you, can go ahead and share that sort of information with other candidates. It did say things though, again, reference the website because I'm not the attorney, but they did say things like you can't write talking points and things like for candidates that they ask you. So there are a lot of rules around this, but once you learn them, it's fine and good to go. And then Boulder Advocacy has that phone number that you can call whenever. I called earlier this week, and within about an hour, I got a call back. So it's a really great resource.
Thank you.
So I have another quick writing assignment. So to contact the candidates running to represent you, you have to know who the candidates are. And you probably all know that every 10 years after the census, all the voting districts are redrawn from your school board level all the way up to the congressional districts. And so for the State House and State Senate, which is primarily the level of government I'll be talking about today, all of your districts are different now. So what your districts were last year are not what they are this year. So first, you need to figure out what that is. And I put in a link in the chat. If you click on that, that's Arkansas Voter View. It's a website run by the Secretary of State's office. You can put in your name and your birthday and search look up. And after you look up your information, you'll scroll down to the very bottom of the page. And in the bottom right, you'll see 3 arrows. Click on that and you'll see what your new voting districts are. You might check back on here a little bit later to make sure your voting information is up to date. And if you search and you don't see your name pop up and your information pop up, you might want to double check to make sure that you are currently registered to vote. So after you figured out what your new State House and State Senate districts are, I put in a second website that is run by the Arkansas Farm Bureau that has really a good directory of candidates running for office that you can easily search who's running. And if you have time in the next minute, you can write down the names of people running so you can look them up afterwards. But there's over 300 people, I believe, running for state House and state Senate this year. You may have 6 people running to be your state representative, so you might not have time to write down all those names. If you do, great, write them down, but at least write how many people are running to represent you, and that will give you kind of an idea of how much time you need to dedicate to reaching out to them if you want to contact them directly. So I'll give you just a minute to do that. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you think you might be the winner for the most people running to represent you, you can put that number in the chat too. And one thing I'll say that some of you may be thinking, there are a few lawsuits right now around what the congressional districts and the state house districts should look like. But it could be a long time before those are resolved. So I think the best bet is just to assume the way they are currently is the way they are going to be when you vote for the primary and in the general election, unless it's proved otherwise. So I will move on to the next section. Candidate forums. I'll start by talking about candidate forums if you're advocating just on your own as an individual, and then I'll talk about candidate forums as, you know, a nonprofit who might want to run a candidate forum. So first, as an individual who wants to advocate on their own, candidate forums are awesome because the hardest part is already done by someone else. That's getting the candidates to a specific place to have a conversation. So you don't have to do that work. You just have to figure out where the candidate forums are and attend them. So a lot of groups host candidate forums during election year. During the primaries, you'll see a lot of the county political parties hosting candidate forums for the people running in the primary for their party, be it Republican, Democrat, or Libertarian. So you can go on the local parties' websites or social media pages to see what upcoming events they may have with candidates. There are groups like League of Women Voters and the NAACP that host candidate forums. You'll see sometimes groups like the Rotary Club or fraternities or sororities will invite a different candidate to their meetings each week to just briefly give a spiel about why they are looking for their vote. So there are a lot of opportunities out there during the election year to connect with candidates that someone else has already organized that are really good for individual advocates. After you figured out where the candidate forums are that you want to attend, make sure you have a good question to ask. And it's true that there are no dumb questions, but there are questions that are less likely to get a good response from a candidate. And what I mean by that is I've seen before people ask very specific questions of candidates and very specific questions of elected officials too. And like I mentioned before, candidates are just like us. They're not experts in everything. And if you ask a question that gets really into the weeds about a policy, what they're most likely to say is, oh, I'm not familiar with that. I'll look into that and get back to you. They probably won't get back to you. So to get the information that you're trying to get from the candidate in general, it's better to ask a bit broader question. Maybe you're a person who has a disability and a service that you really want covered by Medicaid isn't covered by Medicaid or the PASS. So you want to figure out a candidate's take on that and if this candidate would support efforts to get that service covered. Instead of asking them about the very specific, naming off the very specific service you're trying to get covered, you might ask a more broad question like, what are your thoughts on expanding Medicaid or PASS coverage to include services, more services for people with disabilities? There's a service that would really help me and a lot of people I know, but it's not currently covered. And that will kind of still give them you'll get the information probably that you're wanting the candidate to share without them just saying, oh, I'll look into that and get back to you, if that makes sense. The other thing that you want to bring, in addition to a good question to the candidate forum, is a friend. Because one, it's just nice to hang out with your friends, but also because if you can get a candidate to answer your question and your friend can record the response and you asking the question, that's something that you can share on social media or connect with the candidate afterwards if they're elected, to remind them that they made that promise. And that's not meant as like a gotcha thing. Oh, I've got you recorded saying that you support this. It's really, if you think about it, there are a million different events that candidates are going to. There's a lot of people they're meeting. There's a lot of important issues that they're talking about and hearing about and learning about. They also, have a family probably. They might have another full-time job. They might already be an elected official, which has a lot of responsibilities too, even in an off year. There's still meetings that they have to attend. So they have a lot going on, and it's quite possible for no malicious reason that they would forget they made that promise, or wanted to work on the issue. So either, when you're sending emails or in a candidate forums, if you can get it recorded or in writing that they support it and remind them afterwards and say, congratulations on being elected. Thank you so much for saying when you were a candidate that you would support this. I'm really excited to be working on this with you. Let me know what I can do or have a follow-up conversation with you about this. So bring a friend. Now, there is one technique that some groups, like I've seen Save the Children Action Network talk about this before. It's called bird dogging. And this is meant, in a candidate forum, maybe you asked the question and the candidate didn't quite understand what your question was, so they didn't really respond to it. Or maybe you didn't get to the candidate forum early enough to ask your question. So you didn't have an opportunity to get that information from the candidate. After the forums are over, candidates are usually hanging out, shaking hands, talking to people, and you want to be the first one over to them asking that question, to make sure that, either you get that follow-up question in or that you ask your question that you weren't able to during the forum itself. So I guess that's what bird dogs do. They go straight where they're supposed to go. So you want to be the first one there. So that's something you can do in candidate forums also as an individual. And maybe still have your friend around you recording you. I don't know. So you can say that afterwards. And of course you want to be respectful when you're doing that. Think about it like a reporter would be doing after a press conference or something, trying to get a response from whoever they're holding the press conference for. So that's as an individual. As a nonprofit, if you're wanting to host a candidate forum, in addition to everything that you normally do to have a good community event, you also need to make sure a few things. First off, that you invite all the candidates running for a race. If you're, hosting one for the Republican primary for whatever district, you need to invite all the candidates for that. If you're hosting one for Senate District 32 in the general election, you need to invite all the candidates for that race. You can't pick and choose who you invite, just like you can't endorse any candidates or suggest in any way who people should vote for. That's a big no-no for nonprofits. But candidates have the right to say no, or just not respond to you at all. But due diligence for nonprofits is to reach out to all the candidates and extend that offer. And you might send up a follow-up email just because they're probably getting a lot of invitations. They might have missed it the first time you send it. So give them a follow-up email or a phone call. The next two things that you really need to run a candidate forum is a good moderator and a good timekeeper. So we probably have all seen an event where a candidate answered a question and had extra time, so went into their talking points and then started to say all the talking points that they've ever had in their entire life that have nothing to do with the original question, but they keep going on and on and on. A good moderator can cut them off in a polite way and make sure that they're staying on task answering the question. And the timekeeper can also make sure you're following the schedule and all the candidates are getting equal amount of time to answer the question. For the timekeeper, I'd really recommend letting them leave their phone alarm on so they can hear when the phone alarm goes off, and the audience can and the moderator can, but also holding up physical signs with 3 minutes left, 2 minutes left. And actually, I'll say 3 minutes is a long time to answer a question at candidate forum. You don't want to give them 7 minutes or something, probably, but that's obviously your choice. But you also want to hold up cards. I'd say this is too small. And just in a very practical way, some people think candidates ignore when these cards are held up, but think about it. A lot of people are very nervous public speaking, even candidates, even elected officials. And so what are they doing? They're not looking at the audience. They're not making eye contact. They're looking at the back wall right above everyone's heads. So they probably might not notice you holding up a tiny sign like this. So I would get a regular size paper and put the time on that to make sure that the candidates see it and the moderator sees it as well. And it's, just a very practical thing for the candidate forums. And obviously you want to follow up and thank them for their time afterwards. You can, as a nonprofit, ask questions during the candidate forums. And Boulder Advocacy has information of exactly how you need to wordsmith these. But you can't, like I've said, you can't in any way as a nonprofit employee or organization suggest who people should vote for. I went to an Alliance for Justice training. They said you can't even say things like we need more women in office because you're suggesting to people that they should vote for women. And so you have to be very careful how you write these questions. Boulder Advocacy has a lot of information on this, but you have to, instead of saying question like 1,000 people in Arkansas lives are saved every year because of this program. Don't you think we should have this program expanded? Well, that would be a leading question in which you're suggesting the answer to the candidate, because obviously they want to support this program to save even more lives. And you're suggesting the candidate or the people in the audience, if the candidate says no, that they're not a good candidate and they shouldn't vote for them. So instead you might say something like, what are your thoughts on Arkansas's expanded Medicaid program? And that's very general. You're not in any way suggesting what the nonprofit thinks about this issue. You're making it very broad and still trying to get that information from candidates. So our next writing assignment, I'll give you just a minute to do this, is either as a nonprofit or as an individual, what is the top question that you want candidates to answer this year? And you can put it in the chat if you want to, or you can just write it down yourself and reference it back later. Okay. While y'all are writing the last few words on that, we'll move on to the next section, advocating within your network. So far, everything I've talked about is how you can use the election to advocate with candidates. But in this, I'm talking about ways that you can connect with your supporters, maybe your board members, your friends, your family, your coworkers, about whatever your ultimate policy goal is, and then your election advocacy goals too. Because especially we're talking about the state General Assembly, they're not meeting right now. And if you're trying to get a law passed and trying to get people to care about it when they're not meeting, it can seem like not very important or not very urgent. And that's something that they'll think about later when the General Assembly is meeting. But you want to build momentum towards your goal and get people caring about this and talking about this now. So you can use election activities to make that connection with people about it currently being urgent, and get them learning more about this issue and passionate about reaching out to people about it now in the lead up to the General Assembly meeting. So first I'll talk about things you can do as an individual that you can't do as a nonprofit. And then I'll talk about some things you can do as a nonprofit. But either one of those, I'd say when you're trying to choose tactics to use with your network, a really good way to start is going to the websites or thinking back to events that you've attended that have made an impact on you, that when it made you go and show up to this place to learn about this thing, or make you want to reach out to an elected official about an issue, and go to that social media post and figure out what you can adapt when you write your own post, or think about how that event was formatted and see if you can host a similar type of event that will get people passionate about an issue. So stealing other people's ideas is always okay. You just gotta make a spin on it and make it your own. Starting as an individual, the easiest thing you can do, I think, is make a social media post, a video, or just written out post about what will be top of mind when you go to vote and why. Share, just like with candidates, you want to make the head and heart arguments, share why this is personally important to you, and maybe link to more resources where people can learn more about your policy goal that you want to achieve. And you can also encourage people to also be considering that when they go to vote. Not something you can do as a nonprofit, but something you can do as an individual. You can also, as an individual, encourage other people to go to candidate forums. You can't attend all the candidate forums in the world. You probably definitely wouldn't want to. They get a bit repetitive. But if you're connecting with people online who also care about this issue and want to engage in trying to figure out how, when the General Assembly is not meeting, inviting people to go to those candidate forums that you can't go to and ask that question and bring a friend to record it, gets even more people learning about and thinking about this event and participating in election advocacy. You can also share candidate information as an individual. If you see candidates making social media posts, or maybe they did an interview where they talked about the policy issue that you care about, you can share that information out with your network as well, to keep them educated and thinking about this issue. So moving on to things that you can do as a nonprofit. One thing that Arkansas Advocates does is we put out a voter's guide every other year during the election year, where we just give brief overviews about an issue and then some sample questions to ask candidates about that issue. And those are the types of questions that are broad and 501c3 allowable. But that is a good way to get people still thinking about this issue, because you're connecting it to the election. We put out a pretty big voter's guide, but you can make it just one page, like a brief overview of whatever you care about and some sample questions for candidates, and share that out with your network. That's easy to do. It doesn't have to be designed or anything. It just be a simple email blast. Some organizations, we don't, but some organizations do candidate questionnaires. You send it to all the candidates running for whatever office, and just like you can share that out like you would a voter's guide, but you can't in any way suggest with the questions that you're asking the candidates what you think as a nonprofit about how they should respond. And you can't add any additional information in there that would you just can't in any way suggest who someone should vote for as a nonprofit. It can't be done. And there's a very specific rules for this that you can check out on Boulder Advocacy if that's something, a candidate questionnaire is something that your organization wants to do. But I will say that is seems to be, to me, a bit more tricky thing where you have to follow a lot of rules to make sure you're not violating 501c3 allowable activities. So we won't have time to write down a whole social media post right now, but you might take maybe 30 seconds right now and just write down a outline. This would be for you as an individual, not as any nonprofit, but just you as Sarah or whoever, what you care about, what you'll be thinking about when you go to vote, and just write an outline of what that might look like and what that would include, what would be that heart argument and what might be a head argument to get people thinking about this right now. And I'm going to start talking about the next one since we just have a little bit of time left, and I want to make sure you have time to ask any questions you have. But one really big way you can advocate on issues during the election year is running a ballot measure campaign. You have the right as a voter and citizen of Arkansas, either as an individual or a nonprofit, to put measures on the ballot directly to the citizens for their consideration. If for whatever reason you don't think your city or county government or the state General Assembly is going to vote for the policy solution you're trying to see, you can put that forward for voters directly for them to consider. And there's different ways you can do that. You can propose a ballot measure for initiated act, which would be the equivalent of a bill that would become law that the General Assembly would do. You can also propose amendments to the state constitution, and the state constitution has a lot in there that you might connect on. And you also have the option to do a referendum if the state General Assembly passed a bill that you think goes against your policy goal. You can do a referendum campaign, so a certain amount of days after the bill is passed to try to get that repealed. It's not easy to run a ballot measure, and I could talk many hours about running a ballot measure campaign. I'll only just talk for a few minutes about it to give you an idea about what goes into running a ballot measure campaign. But I will say it takes years of planning to run a successful ballot measure campaign. And success could look more than one way than just passing the measure at the ballot. You may have other goals towards that too, like building a volunteer network or raising awareness about your issue outside of just trying to pass it. But it does take years of planning and a lot of time and resources to get it passed. Ballot measures can cost $1 million to run a ballot measure campaign in Arkansas. A lot of money goes into this because you have to collect a lot of signatures. Instead of 135 people you're trying to appeal to, you're trying to appeal to 1 million people in the state to get them to vote a certain way. So that a lot of work goes into that. And you want to start off by getting together a coalition of like-minded people, maybe as an individual or as a nonprofit, get together other like-minded nonprofits who want to see your policy solution and plan together what exactly that would look like, what the ballot language is that you want to have, think through what your goals are for your campaign outside of just passing the ballot measure, and what your values are for the campaign. Because during election years, especially as you get closer and closer to the election day, a lot of big decisions are coming at you, and they can be very stressful. And if you have those values already set in stone before you get to crunch time, you can refer back to those to make sure that you're making decisions based on your friends and colleagues' values when it comes time. You also want to really make sure you have a good attorney because ballot measure campaigns, a lot of legal work goes into it. The Secretary of State's handbook on just the legal things that you have to do for a ballot measure campaign is about 70 pages. And that's very legal, technical language. And that's not, things like how you promote the ballot measure and all of that to get support. That's just the basic legal requirements you have to have. So having an attorney on hand to help you navigate that's really important. And, it's quite possible that if your measure gets on the ballot, there'll be groups that don't like it and will try to stop it in the court system. So you need an attorney for that also. And I will say, attorneys are like doctors. They specialize in a specific type of law. And so just like you don't want your dentist to do your brain surgery, you don't want a personal injury attorney to be your ballot measure attorney unless they promise to specialize this and educate themselves on this to make sure that they know the ins and outs of this and they aren't guessing. You also actually have to petition voters to get it on the ballot at all. So for initiated acts right now, I think you have to collect, I'll send the Secretary of State's handbook on this so you can refer and double check to make sure I'm right. But I think it's about 70,000 signatures for initiated act that you have to collect in 15 different counties. And if you want an amendment to the Constitution, I believe it's 90,000 signatures in 15 different counties. So to do that takes a really strong volunteer network. You might even have to hire staff to go out and collect signatures. So that's a lot of time and resources that goes into that. And there's a lot that goes into making sure that you can have valid signatures. So you want to give yourself a cushion in case any signatures get thrown off. So 90 is the minimum, but you need a cushion even more. So a lot of work goes in that aspect. You need to promote the ballot measure to get people educated on why it's needed and get them to vote for it. So that would, might entail doing polls or focus groups to figure out what language makes the ballot measure most easily understandable or appeal to the most people as possible. And that takes money. And then you have to, maybe do social media ads, do grassroots door knocking campaign, host events. All this takes time and resources. So a lot goes into it to run a ballot measure campaign. You can also do a no campaign. If there's a bad ballot measure that you think would be harmful towards your goal, you can get a group together to oppose a ballot measure as well. That's an option. For nonprofits, I'll just make one note that it is considered direct lobbying when you do ballot measure advocacy, because you're asking people, instead of asking a elected official to vote a certain way, you're asking Arkansas voters to vote a certain way. So it's direct lobbying, and nonprofits have a lot less flexibility in how much lobbying they can do versus advocacy and education. So you need to keep that in mind if that's an approach that you want to take. So I'm going to do a quick poll again. Is a ballot measure campaign a tactic you consider using? Or maybe you don't want to run the ballot measure campaign, but would you maybe be interested as an individual in volunteering on one if one supported your issue? Maybe collecting signatures or hosting an event. Give it a couple more seconds. So I think some people are unsure, but it looks like for people are interested in it, and one person said no, and I can understand both of those responses. It's a big decision to make either way. It's obviously easier to just volunteer though. So I'll do really one quick bonus round, voter education, either as an individual or nonprofit. If you don't want to do issue-based advocacy, but still want to just do some civic engagement work during election year, this is a great way you can do that. There's a lot of things you can do. You can, as a nonprofit, you can run a voter registration drive. As an individual, you can volunteer on one. I'll send out some information on how to host a voter registration drive if you want to do that. And you can check out your local League of Women Voters or NAACP or some college groups sometimes do voter registration drives that you can participate in as an individual. You can share information about the voting process that you see from reliable sources like the local county clerk's office to make sure that people know what they need to do to make sure their ballot's valid. Share the Arkansas Voter View website so people can go and check to make sure that their voter registration information is up to date. Sometimes groups like churches or even Uber on election day sometimes give free rides to the polls for people who have transportation issues. So sharing out that information can be a really great way to counteract so much misinformation out there that's meant to discourage people from voting, or even trying to get their ballot invalid by telling them to mark their ballot a certain way that's not correct. So that's a really great thing you can do, even if it's just sharing information from reliable sources that you see. So we have about 5 minutes left. Are there any questions or thoughts that anyone has? It's okay if not. It's a rainy Tuesday afternoon and spring break week. So, well, I appreciate all y'all for being on this evening. I'm going to share some resources after this if you want to learn more. And if you do have any questions, you can feel free to email me and I'll talk with you after this about anything that I've talked about. And after I end this webinar, a pop-up screen will pop up with a quick 3-question survey. If you could take that really quickly to let us know how this workshop went and any suggestions you have for future workshops that we do, I really appreciate that. But I thank you all for being here, and I hope that you've all thought of ways that you can participate in election advocacy this year. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Have a good
So much
evening.
good information.
It was really great.
Thank you.